It was the third character in an epic era of sports car racing, where Audi's powerful diesel fended off the lighter and more nimble works cars of LMP2. It was originally designed to race at Le Mans under a very different name, but this car went on to race not only in North America, but it returned to Europe where its life first began, with some success. This is the story of the Acura ARX series of Le Mans prototypes and the Courage LC75, which they were based on. On a chilly day in early 2006, a brand new car rolled out on the Maison Blanche circuit at Le Mans. This was the new Courage LC75, a completely new design from the local constructor. It was designed as a direct replacement for the Courage C65 LMP2 car, but the French company was a little late to the party. Lola, Lucchini and Pilbeam had already built and raced cars to the new Le Mans regulations, which would become mandatory by 2007, with the new cars featuring twin rollover structures and floors designed to make the cars less likely to flip over in yaw. So when Courage first rolled out the LC75, it was a year after its rivals had already done so, and the company lost out on some customers like Mazda to Lola. That first LC75 was fitted with a Mechachrome V8, a 3.4 litre variant of the engine used in the GP2 series, but the car never actually raced with this engine fitted. In fact, that very first LC75, and indeed any LC75, didn't actually race until 2007, at least in the original format. When the LC75 finally did make its race debut, one car was run by the Noel Del Bello racing team and the other by Saulnier Racing, and they were both contesting the Le Mans series and the Le Mans 24 Hours itself. Both cars also used the 2-litre AER P07 turbocharged inline 4-cylinder engine, a well-proven unit which could trace its lineage back to the old MG Lola LMP675 cars of the previous generation. In reality though, the customer uptake of the LC75 was actually quite slow in Europe, and ultimately only 2 chassis ever raced as LC75s. The Noel Del Bello car was the first chassis built and the one tested with the Mechachrome V8 engine in that original shakedown. It was the only tub that was ever built as an LC75, while the second LC75, racing with Saulnier Racing in 2007, was actually the old Swiss Spirit LC70 LMP1 car converted into LMP2 trim. The Swiss Spirit team had actually switched monocoques partway through the 2006 season. These two cars had a sporadic racing history, with Chassis 1 not racing at all in 2008 as ORECA later used it as a test car, and then it returned to action with Pegasus Racing in 2009 and ended up racing until the end of 2010, while the second chassis, which was converted from an LMP1 car, raced all the way up until the end of the 2009 season. Neither of them ever scored a class win. Looking at this image of the Noel Del Bello car at Le Mans in 2007, you can see that its overall design was very similar to that of the LC70 LMP1 car seen here. Most of the bodywork was pretty much the same, apart from the side panel, which had some different ducting. Interestingly, the other LC75 running in the same event, that run by Saulnier Racing, had quite a different configuration, though ran the exact same engine. It had a much taller rear wing fitted with different end plates. It also had a large inlet on the right hand side of the car, something not seen on the other LC75. While the LC75 wasn't in fact a great success in Europe, neither of the teams running it there were actually the first customers for the car. Instead, that was the Honda Motor Company of North America. In late 2006, Honda's Acura brand announced that it would contest the LMP2 class of the 2007 American Le Mans series with what it initially called the Acura-Courage LC75, with a car each fielded by Andretti Green and Highcroft Racing. Meanwhile, Acura would also enter a third chassis which would be built by Lola to be used by the Fernandez team, and that team would focus on engine development. The first two Courage chassis were passed to Worth Research in the UK for an extensive rework and redesign, as well as the installation of Honda's Acura LMV8 engine, a normally aspirated 3.4 litre V8. The aerodynamic package of the car was extensively reworked. Unlike later Worth Research projects, extensive work was done in the wind tunnel on the new Acura bodywork, initially with a 50% scale model at the ARC wind tunnel in Indianapolis, and then later using the full-scale wind tunnel at the University of Stuttgart in Germany. The final bodywork looked quite unlike the original Courage bodywork, with those distinctive lumps and bumps on the nose which covered the front suspension components all being smoothed out, and the tip of the nose was lowered. A new front splitter was introduced as well, with a distinctive double hump design. A new rear wing was also introduced with a raised central section, though the end plates were conceptually similar to the original Courage designs. The side panels of the car were also significantly reworked, with more complex air exits at the front and far more sculpted side inlets. There was additionally an increase in front overhang, but the rear overhang of the car was decreased. The car was also marginally wider than the LC75, meaning that the front wheel pods were also completely new on the Acura version of the car, and on the higher downforce circuits of the American Le Mans series, large double-deck dive planes were added to the front of the car. There were also revisions made to the suspension layout of the Courage chassis. However, the car retained the monocoque in unchanged configuration, including the front impact structure and the transmission. The bell housing was redesigned to accept the new engine, but that work was done by Courage. The wheelbase also remained unchanged on the car. All of these changes resulted in the car being rebranded from the Courage LC75 into the Acura ARX-01a. The new Acura branded car started the 2007 season around 40 kilograms over the weight limit, and that had to be reduced as the season went on. And despite this, the reworked Acura scored a surprise class win right at the beginning of the season at the Sebring 12 Hours, and second overall in that race. In 2008, an upgrade was introduced to the car, which saw it fitted with revised bodywork, including new rear wing end plates, and the trailing edge of the bodywork kicked up notably. There was also revised front and rear suspension and a new one-piece transmission casing. A new crash structure was also said to have been developed at that point, along with what was described as new monocoque internals, whatever that means. But in reality, these were still the LC70 tubs used in 2007. Despite this, these upgraded cars would now become known as ARX-01bs, but of course they were still the same chassis raced in 2007, with one additional unit used. The 2008 American Le Mans Series was an incredible time for sports car racing, with the Audi R10 LMP1 diesels battling with the Penske-run Porsche RS Spyders and the Acura-branded LC70s, with all of them able to win races depending on the track layout. The R10s had much more power, but the lighter Porsche and LC75 design were much faster in the corners, and it made for superb racing. Highcroft and Andretti each got an overall win with Acura-powered LC75s. It was just simply a classic season, and one I wish sports car racing would manage to get back to. No need for balance of performance here. In 2009 though, Acura had a bespoke LMP1 car designed by Worth Research, the Acura ARX-02a, which had no relationship whatsoever to the LC70. And the main effort from Acura and HPD went into that car and not the LMP2 LC75 based machine, although a single example continued in the badly depleted LMP2 class. However, for various reasons, in 2010 the ARX-02a project was abandoned and the whole focus of that organisation returned to LMP2, as the American Le Mans Series was using just a single prototype class for most of its races. Acura had actually withdrawn from the series as a brand, but Honda decided to continue to support Highcroft Racing under its Honda Performance Development brand, HPD. The car then was no longer called an Acura, but was now an HPD, and it had new front bodywork with new wheel pods and front dive planes. The ARX-02a rear wing was also adapted for use on the LMP2 car. This version of the car was then officially called the HPD ARX-01c, but it still retained the Courage chassis. It was quite successful, winning 3 races overall and the championship in 2010. By 2011, the American Le Mans Series was clearly in decline. There were no work-supported full-season entries from HPD. However, in 2010, the decision had been taken to allow European teams to acquire the HPD cars. British teams Straka Racing and later RML both acquired ARX-01s, with the former scoring a class win at Le Mans in 2010. The 2011 version of the car, which was called the HPD ARX-01d, 01d featured a brand new engine from HPD, the HR28TT, which was a 2.8 litre twin-turbo V6, loosely based on one of Honda's production V6 engines in line with the new regulations in that class. In aerodynamic terms, the differences between the C and D variants of the ARX cars seem to be simply the new turbo inlets on the D-spec. The arrival of the HPD ARX-01 in Europe resulted in a slightly bizarre situation where it would be pitted directly against the brand new ORECA-03 LMP2, which was based on the exact same LC70 monocoque, as well as the original LC75s, which were still racing at the time, one with an AER engine and one had now been fitted with one of the new Honda engines as well. And at Le Mans, the last ORECA-01 LMP1 was also racing. A whole bunch of different variants of the same cars taking each other on, although the LC75s didn't compete at Le Mans. While the LC75 hadn't been a great success in Europe, ORECA had seen the opportunity to introduce a new LC70 based LMP2 car. In late 2010 it announced it would offer a new LMP2 variant of the car, stating it would only make about 4 examples of the new version of the car, and it probably had the capacity to make as many as 6, but it stated clearly that the new car wouldn't be available in large numbers. The plain chrome renders issued with this announcement made it clear that the car would again be based on the Courage LC70 chassis, but with not a little influence coming from the ARX-01. This new car would be called the ORECA-03, and in the end at least 20 ORECA-03s contested races, though it's not clear if any of them were actually renumbered Courages or ORECA-01s, but that was a lot more cars than ORECA expected to build. The aerodynamics of the ORECA-03 were again revised, while the use of narrower wheels and tyres meant that the floor and wheel arches had to be reworked, and this work was conducted at the ACE wind tunnel in France. The ORECA-03 understandably then looked a lot like the last generation of ORECA-01, which of course looked a lot like the Acura ARX-01 from some angles, with those smoothed out bumps on the front bodywork and the curved front splitter. While the engine installation in the ORECA-03 was not universal, Judd's BMW-based engine was used by some teams, by far the most popular installation was the Nissan VK45DE. It went on to be a dominant engine at Le Mans in the LMP2 class. It was developed by Nismo for use in the Super GT GT500 category, where it was fitted to the 350Z GT500 and later the GTR GT500, and later again it was used in all mother chassis GT300 cars. It was loosely based on the Nissan VK series of production car engine, but featured a flat plane crankshaft. The LMP2 version of the engine was developed and maintained by Zytec in the UK, and compared to the GT500 version, the cylinder block was revised, as were the heads, the crank, the rods, the pistons and the intake system were all developed specifically for LMP2, so it's not exactly the same as the engines used in GT300, although it's pretty similar. Many of these changes were made, at least in part, to reduce the cost of the engine, which had to meet a cost cap, rather than for performance reasons, and this meant that the LMP2 version of the engine was actually slightly heavier than the version used in GT500, and I think also slightly heavier than the versions used in the GT300 mother chassis cars. In qualifying at Le Mans in 2011, the ORECA-03 seemed to have a slight edge on the HPD version of the same chassis, and both versions of the car actually outqualified the ORECA-01 LMP1 car, although that was a highly experimental hybrid version. In the race, the ORECA-03 finished up as runner-up to a Zytec for the overall class win, while the best HPD ARX-01 was 4th. In the wider Le Mans series, Straka Racing finished the championship in 2nd place in LMP2, but didn't ever win the class at any race, while the ORECA-03 had 2 class wins but finished lower in the championship as it was different cars that did the winning. However, Worth Research didn't just develop a new LMP2 engine installation in 2011, it also developed a brand new LMP1 version of the car, called the HPD ARX-01e, which is often forgotten as it only ever raced once. The car used a revised version of the original 3.4 litre V8 engine, but fitted with bigger restrictors in order to race in LMP1. Notably, the car used wider LMP1 specification front wheels and tyres, and so the suspension was revised accordingly. This in turn meant that the bodywork too had to be completely reworked. While the centerline of the car remained essentially the same as all other ARX-01s, and the ORECA-01 as well, the front wheel pods were larger and completely new, with blunt leading edges and small cutouts around the outer edge. Large aerodynamic elements sat on the outer edges of the front splitter, which was very similar in concept to the previous ARX-01s and of course the ORECA versions. A new regulatory compliant narrower rear wing was fitted in line with those latest rules. Notably, the car didn't use an engine cover fin. From the side, the shape of the new front wheel pods is clear to see. The aerodynamic elements at the trailing edge of the front wheel pods seem to be a little bit simplified, while the side inlet seems to be blanked off, but curiously the channel leading to it remains. At Sebring in 2011, the car did something remarkable. It beat most of the diesels. In fact, it bested the works cars from both Audi and Peugeot amid claims of sandbags being found around the side of the Sebring circuit. But ironically, it didn't win the race overall because it was beaten by the private ORECA-run Peugeot 908. However, the ARX-01e was only raced once by Highcroft and it was never used again. After the diesels removed the sandbags at Le Mans, it seemed likely that the car couldn't have matched the Peugeot or Audi at that track anyway. Highcroft's main reason for withdrawing from Le Mans was that it didn't have enough sponsorship to race in France, and Honda's backing had become greatly reduced. Highcroft then separated from Honda altogether and it went looking for a new partner, and found one pretty fast with the Delta Wing project and later Nissan. With the LMP1 project shelved, one final variant of the ARX-01 was developed, the ARX-01g, and this was a variant of the LMP2 car built to meet the ACO's LMP2 cost cap regulations, and it was in essence a simplified version of the old 01d. Two of these cars were built and they were raced by the Level 5 team in the hugely depleted LMP2 class in the latter part of the 2011 American Le Mans Series. But wait a minute, what about the ARX-01f? There's a letter missing. We've got to G and we haven't talked about F. Well, it never actually existed. Apparently, Worth Research reserved the letter F for future LMP1 developments, and there were future LMP1 developments, but the letter F wasn't used on them. For 2012, HPD decided to give LMP1 another go. With customer teams in both Europe and the USA, it developed a new version of the LC70, but for the first time actually made changes to the chassis itself. In fact, press releases issued to announce this new LMP1 from Honda HPD stressed that the car featured what was described as an entirely new Worth Research designed chassis, which was very different to the LC75. The roll hoops on the launch renders suggested differently. Once the car actually rolled out and it was possible to give the tub some closer inspection, the design of the chassis looked extremely similar to the old LC70 monocoque, with the only really clear difference being the shape of the top of the tub behind the front bulkhead. Some elements in this area of the car were reshaped, with the Courage having a rather more angular design, while parts of the HPD version were smoothed out, and they smoothed out many of these angular bits seen on the French version of the car. Indeed, the HPD-03 monocoque was so similar to the ARX-01g that all that was needed to convert an 01g into a HPD-03 was the new monocoque and some different bodywork parts. The chassis was dimensionally identical to the 01 with the same pickup points. It even used the same front crash box. So while the HPD ARX-03 was indeed a new chassis, it was so similar to the Courage LC70 chassis that it must be considered a variant of that car, and not really what the press releases described as being all new. At first glance, the 03A looked a lot like the 01e, with a lot of details carrying over between the two designs, including the whole centre line of the car and the front splitter. The front wheel pods, though, had been reworked and were a little bit more curved at the leading edge compared to the 2011 version. The brake ducts too seem to have been enlarged slightly and reshaped. There are a couple of versions of leading edge aerodynamic devices. For example, large dive planes were seen on one variant of the car, but the cutout next to the headlights seen on the 2011 car were also present on the 2012 LMP1. The rear view mirror housings had also been dramatically redesigned, I suspect to further reduce drag. The new car also featured the mandatory openings above the front and rear wheels, as well as the fin on the engine cover. This was not the only new car for 2012 from HPD. Worth Research had also used the revised chassis to build up a new LMP2 car, the ARX-03b, Now this car was quite similar to the ARX-01g, but featured revised front wheel pods, with front aerodynamic elements clearly coming from the LMP1 project, along with the new rear view mirrors. The louvres ahead of the mandatory holes on the front wheel arches were less aggressive than those seen on the LMP1 car. In 2012, a single LMP1 specification ARX-03 contested the American Le Mans series, and a pair of LMP2 cars also did the same, while in the WEC there were a pair of LMP1 specification ARX-03s and a single LMP2 version. Alongside that, there were 4 ORECA-03s in the WEC. As the American Le Mans Series and WEC both shared the opening round of the year at the Sebring 12 Hours, all of these cars competed together. But the LMP1 cars were no match for the Audi diesels once again, but they were a good match for the Pescarolo 01 and the Lolas competing in that class. In LMP2, the HPD branded cars featured 1-2 at Sebring, and the HPD cars went on to win both prototype classes in the American Le Mans Series that year. Meanwhile, in the rest of the world, the ORECA-03s were multiplying and contesting races in the WEC and European Le Mans series, scoring many class wins and constantly tussling with the HPDs in the former series. At Le Mans that year, the HPD was just the fastest petrol-powered LMP1 car in qualifying, if you ignore the works-entered cars of Toyota with its hybrid. In fact, the Toyota project was at least in part why ORECA lost interest in the LMP1 version of its car, as it played a major role in running the Toyotas. At the end of the race though, the HPDs were soundly beaten by a Toyota-powered Lola, along with the works cars. But in LMP2, there was a big fight between the ORECA-03s and the HPDs, and in the end it was an HPD ARX-03b which won the class ahead of 4 ORECAs. Pretty dominant for a car concept which first rolled out in 2006. In 2013, only one HPD entered the WEC in the LMP1 class, and it contested the first 3 races of the Championship plus Le Mans, while another example continued to contest the American Le Mans series. These cars were both in the updated ARX-03 specification, which would turn out to be the last but one version of the Courage-Oreca Acura HPD development cycle. The 3C was quite similar to the 3A, but had wider front tyres and reshaped front wheel pods once more as a result. And the rear wheel pods were revised notably, with an aerodynamic element on the inner edge of the mandatory openings above the rear wheels. The front suspension geometry had also been revised somewhat, as was the steering. Le Mans wasn't a huge success for the LMP1 HPD. After the car suffered a major crash ahead of the race, the team struggled through the rest of the 24 hours, although it was the best placed non-works car in LMP1. In LMP2, the sole HPD entry was not a classified finisher, and the ORECA-03 failed to finish on the podium. It was also in 2013 that another new variant of the LC70 appeared on the scene, the Alpine A450. This car was promoted and entered as being a completely new and different design, which was something of an oddity as works teams were not allowed in LMP2 really, a rule which didn't actually exist in the American Le Mans series. Yet Alpine, Renault's sports car brand, had a full works team with its own cars. But in reality, the Alpine A450 was simply an ORECA-03 with a Nissan engine and some shiny stickers on it. And that car really raised the question of what is the true identity of a racing car. Simply putting some stickers on a car, in my opinion, doesn't change its identity, and I think that it was a shame that the cars were allowed to race as Alpines when they were nothing of the sort. But then how much do you need to change a car before it becomes something completely different? I think that the chassis, the monocoque, is the heart of a car, and if that is not changed, then the original identity should remain. Acura got it right in its first press releases, describing its new car as an Acura-Courage LC75. The ARX branding and the alphabet soup which followed really was just some marketing. Up until the HPD ARX-03, these cars were simply rebodied Courages. The ORECA-03 was the same too, but at least ORECA was the company that actually manufactured the chassis of the car when it put its name on the tip of the nose. The Alpine A450 was an ORECA-03, and I think that really means that it should have been described as a Courage LC75 Nissan, though conceivably the Nissan engine could have been rebranded as a Renault, as the two companies were kinda operating as one by that point. Alpine though was simply the team that ran the car, except it didn't. Alpine was simply the company that sponsored the Signatech team which actually ran the car itself. Anyway, in the American Le Mans Series, the HPD ARX-03 continued to race, winning the championship in 2013 in its LMP1 guise, and it also made up 100% of the LMP2 field, so also won that. With the unification of Grand Am and the ILMS in 2014, there was no place for the LMP1 specification HPD ARX-03, but one of the LMP2 specification cars did score a single win against the Daytona prototypes. But the updates by that point had stopped, as a new Acura branded car was in development for the 2015 season, the ARX-04b. We'll have to get back to that. The last race for the HPD ARX-03 came at the 2015 Sebring 12 Hours, where it failed to finish. However, there was still a bit of life left in the ORECA-03 back in Europe, which was updated in 2014 into the ORECA-03a, which included the addition of the mandatory engine cover fin and openings above the front and rear wheel arches. Alpine described this as the A450B, but it was just the same. There was also a new design of front wheel pod. ORECA-03Rs raced throughout 2014 and into 2015 and even into 2016 in limited numbers, before open cars were finally outlawed by the ACO. By this point, a new generation of prototypes had been introduced directly to replace the ORECA-03s, the ORECA-05. However, the LC70 in its least potent form, but perhaps its most commercially successful form, continued to race for another full season in the USA, in the IMSA Prototype Challenge class, but we'll get back to that in the third and final part of this series, which was only ever meant to be one video. If you've enjoyed this tale of a French car racing around in America and then back in Europe and doing some winning, well, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. But for now, thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon somewhere in the pit lane.